All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. I think that's our cue when the music stops. I'm Colin Corbin. I'm a cloud and AI specialist with Microsoft Elevate, and I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate the engagement. We're going to talk a little bit about silo busting today. We're going to talk about how to unify people, process, and technology for mission acceleration. And I'm very aware that Bob and I are the ones standing between you and the reception tonight, so we are going to get right to it. But again, really appreciate everybody being here. This is a session that's going to have sort of a lens of nonprofits. I've been in the IT business for about 30 years now. I've worked in all the major sectors across commercial, state and local government, as well as nonprofits now. And I can tell you that the lessons you're going to hear about today are every bit as applicable in those other areas as they are in nonprofits. So if there are people here from organizations outside that nonprofit industry, just you'll have some lessons and some nuggets I think that can be useful for you as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. And I'm going to start with Microsoft's mission. And I'm sure you've all seen this before. It was probably said this morning multiple times. But our mission as a company is really to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And those are words on a piece of paper. You can look at them that way. I can tell you just from being inside of Microsoft, they are very sincere. They're very sincere about the way that Microsoft people work with one another internally, the way we collaborate together. They're very sincere in the way that we go to market with our products, and they're very sincere about the way that we work with our customers. And they're sincere to the point that Microsoft has made a very significant investment in bringing this empowerment to life. And a piece of that investment is Microsoft Elevate. I mentioned earlier that I was with Microsoft Elevate. If you're not familiar with Microsoft Elevate is the part of Microsoft that works with nonprofits and works with K through 12 schools as well as community colleges. And it has a mission of really empowering those organizations to be successful in the economy of AI. So as we're all very aware, things are changing very rapidly in the age of AI. We want those technologies to be fruitful, we want them to be useful, and we want them to be useful for people. So that is what Microsoft Elevate is all about. And it's really founded on some basic pillars of education, helping people get skilled up to work in the AI economy. It's founded on a pillar of bringing cloud and AI technologies to our customers. That's a part of what I do. It's to help customers adopt and operationalize these technologies and get value out of them. And it is also about helping customers develop the kinds of policies and approaches to adopt AI and adopt it in a responsible way. And just to put some numbers around the amount of commitment or the stake in the game that Microsoft has behind Elevate, Microsoft Elevate has a committed goal of training 20 million people over the next 2 years in the use of AI worldwide. And that starts in the schools, but it's all the way up through adult education as well. There is a $4 billion commitment that Microsoft has made to bringing AI to nonprofits and to educational institutions over the next 5 years. So a pretty significant investment there just in terms of cash. And Microsoft Elevate has actually formed a policy and research arm to help organizations who are thinking about AI from a policy standpoint, think about it in a way that they can take a measured approach to the adoption of it and bring AI to their communities in a way that's responsible and safe. So that is really what Elevate is all about. And so I'm here with one of my customers, Bob Benoit, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the experiences they've had in that unification and helping an organization get ready for and adopt AI. So a quick agenda. We're going to, again, talk a little bit about that unification of people, process, and technology. I'm going to talk about that at sort of a high level, and then Bob is going to make it very real by telling a story about the Gates Foundation and how they're tackling these issues internally. Then finally, we'll close out, and then we'll get you off to that reception. Okay, so let's talk about silos. And where do silos happen? Oh, people, process, and technology, of course. I had to chuckle when I saw this slide because I literally saw this slide 30 years ago for the first time, and it was an old slide then. I think it came out of IBM or something. I think the fact that this slide is still here and the fact that it's had that kind of endurance and longevity and that it's still relevant speaks to just how true it is. And for those of us who have been in IT or have led in organizations, you understand that really to get things right, it's not just about getting the technology right. It truly is about getting the people and the process right as well. You have to have people who are skilled because, again, the technology is not a lot of use without people there who can use it. And you've got to be able to get the process right. You've got to be able to get it right in terms of how you operate it and how you operationalize it. You've got to get your teams all working together to be able to bring this technology to life. And that's not just the teams that are, IT and the business, it's all the support teams around that as well. So really getting that kind of cohesive solution together is right. It's not always easy to do. There's a lot of organizational things that get in place that sometimes stand in the way. And so when we talk about silo busting, we talk about being able to get to the benefits. It's really about breaking those things down. And I think there's some key strategies that organizations can use to be able to do that. And again, I think we're going to dive pretty directly into those later and hear a story about it. Okay, now just thinking about the technology, I'm going to focus on that piece a little bit. We really see, and in particular in the nonprofit area, but I think this is, again, true for many organizations, those silos manifesting in a couple of different ways. First, they manifest in data. So you have systems that are built around organizational and operational silos, so they create data in those same kinds of silos. And if you don't have a way to get that data to work with data from other silos in an easy way, then the only result you're going to see is out of that narrow slice of data that you can look at. So really a key piece of being able to get the value is to be able to get that data together. And again, this is a place where we've seen nonprofits in particular struggle, just because of resourcing, capabilities in some cases and some other reasons. They're not able to adequately get to that data and get that data to work well together. Now, along with that are the systems that support that data. And again, these two things are very heavily integrated. I mean, you have system and data to go together. But again, many times systems, particularly legacy systems, are built in a way that they're focused on narrow slices of operational process, and they don't necessarily work well across one another. If you have those kinds of legacy systems, they can sometimes become a barrier to your organization adapting and being able to be ready for the future. And the impact of that is, of course, the older those systems get, the more technical debt that you accumulate in those data and systems, the more operational debt you're also going to incur in terms of your processes. So again, those things go hand in hand. And the net impact of that is you as a nonprofit in particular want to be spending your resources on delivering your mission. So it's being out helping people in many cases, not care and feeding for legacy systems and having to spend your resources that way. So at Microsoft, we have a perspective that tackling that problem really means unification, first and foremost. So it's unifying your data so that you have all of your data in one place and making it interoperable. And then also unifying your systems so that those systems can work across not just that narrow slice of business processes that they were built for, but that they can also address your organization holistically. And the benefit of that, of course, is that once you have systems set up that way and once you have your data in that kind of position, you're able to make people collaborate or have people collaborate more effectively. You can make your systems more efficient. And in many cases, you can automate those systems. And that benefit is that you get to take the resources that you used to spend on those systems and then, again, drive that directly into your mission where you want it to be. And then finally, of course, there's the notion of transformation, which is when you get your systems in that spot, you can start to do things that maybe were unimaginable in the way that your legacy systems were constructed. So again, that unification is really important, and then bringing the AI to it to be able to get those efficiency gains, the productivity gains, and the transformation gains. Now, again, strictly from a nonprofit perspective, and again, I think a lot of these use cases are going to be applicable not just to nonprofits, but really in the nonprofit space, what we see is a lot of things around, in particular, fundraising and financial analysis, so being able to get data in one place so that you've got a single source of truth for all of your data. It's being able to visualize data in real time so that you have the operational intelligence to make decisions in the now about how you're applying the limited resources that you have, as well as being able to look at past trends so that you can forecast, here's what we think is going to happen in the future. We need to adapt now in this way to be able to handle that when that situation comes. It's about automation. There's a lot of compliance processes, a lot of regulatory processes, and other things that many organizations are faced with. These are not necessarily value adds to your mission. They definitely support your mission, but they're not directly there. So being able to automate those and, again, recapture those resources for more mission-driven things is critically important. And then finally, doing that in a way that's governed and making sure that data that should be private stays private. Those are all the benefits of being able to have AI inside those unified systems. That admittedly, when you stand back and look at it, there's a great opportunity there, but it can feel a little bit challenging. Sometimes that challenge feels like it may actually be bigger than the opportunity when you think about what you have to change or what you might have to do to be able to get to a point where you can do that unification. And in particular, this is I think a critical thing for nonprofits, again, because you're so focused on being able to get your resources out to supporting your mission, where that mission might be identifying vaccines to save lives. It might be saving lives after a natural disaster. The things that really mean something that impact people. But it can be done, and I've sort of finished the introduction here. I'm going to turn this over to Bob, and Bob is going to make that sort of brief introduction very real and talk to you about an experience they had at the foundation in doing exactly this in terms of breaking down those silos. So Bob.
Thank you, Colin.
Jump in.
Really good to be here. Before I jump into our case study, again, my name is Bob Benoit. I'm the CIO at the Gates Foundation. And we're really excited about the partnership that we get from Elevate and the way that they've empowered us to embrace the cloud, to bring in interoperability into our environment. And there's a lot of investments we've made up until now that it makes you pretty excited when you go to the keynote today and see all the ways in which Microsoft is embedding AI into everything they're doing. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but I got pretty excited. I also got pretty overwhelmed. Anyone feel a little bit overwhelmed this morning? AI is in everything, and how do we think about adopting that in the right way in our organizations? They talked about it a little bit. I think the metric was, who remembers the metric, the number of AI initiatives that fail? I think it was something like 90% was the study. And they talked about some of the reasons why. They talked about data. None of these are new things, right? Garbage in, garbage out. It's something we've been hearing for 20 years related to data. Well, data is what powers AI, and so if you're not investing in your data ecosystem, then you're not going to succeed. They talked about the pace of change and how quickly things are moving. Literally, there are things in my deck that, from a pilot that we did just a few weeks ago, that I have to go change when I get home tonight because of announcements that Microsoft has made today related to some of the acquisitions or partnerships that they're doing. And then they also talked about this idea of silos and breaking down silos in order to achieve business outcomes. So the silo that might exist between IT and the business and making sure things are business-led, or the silos that might exist between different lines of business, like Colin was mentioning, where your data gets isolated into different silos. All of those things can become barriers and feel really overwhelming for how to move forward together. And so at the Gates Foundation and in my role, I think quite a lot about putting things in place to help overcome these silos to make sure that we can take advantage of innovations like AI. And that starts really with making sure you're really clear about what your foundation priorities are. For us, it's foundational priorities, your business priorities. And at the Gates Foundation, that's really clear for us. In May, Bill made the announcement that he was going to be giving away the majority of his wealth in the next 20 years to the Gates Foundation. We think that's about $2 billion over the next 20 years towards a goal and a vision that all lives should have the opportunity to live a healthy and productive life. And that looks like things like no mother or child under the age of 5 dying of preventable causes. That looks like the eradication of infectious diseases. That looks like enabling those in extreme poverty to get lifted out of poverty through education and other means. It's a really clear and palpable mission for us to achieve. And so when we think about the role of innovation in that, we're all clear on coming together for that. I'm the CIO at the foundation, though, so I'm not the one that's thinking about the applicability of AI for a frontline healthcare worker. I'm not the one that's thinking about IoT and how we can take soil samples to help with agricultural development. Our program teams are thinking about that. We are an organization, though, that believes heavily in innovation. And Bill's seen this throughout his history when he was at Microsoft and now at the foundation, is the power of innovation to get to outcomes that aren't currently possible. And part of our role at the foundation within operations and within IT is to make sure that we're creating an ecosystem that allows for that innovation to happen. That can be things as simple as not having downtime, having seamless integration between our systems, but it's also an ecosystem that allows our teams to look at insights across our data. And so we look for having integral partnerships with our business to make sure that we understand what their needs are. We bring to the table trusted technology to help them solve solutions, durable solutions. And I want to do a little double click on business insights, because when we think about business insights, beyond the traditional BI area where you might have financial reports for your financial system or HR reports for your talent strategy, and we think about data that powers AI for innovation, we really think about an interoperable, cross-cutting set of data. So for us, that meant investing in a new data platform. We call our enterprise data platform, that brings together our external data. So think about data that's about the efficacy of our work in the field, with internal data like our financial data and our investment data and strategic data. So the data that's about our theory of change and the work that we want to do. And at the foundation, we kind of operate like 42 different startups. You might have a polio team that's working on innovations around polio. You have an ag team that's working on innovations with agricultural development in sub-Saharan Africa. And you have a US education program that's looking at college readiness in urban areas in the United States. They all historically have worked in a pretty siloed way, and we haven't had the ability, without bringing in a ton of resources and consultants, to look across that data and find common insights, lessons learned to apply to our work going forward. And in the age of AI, where things are moving so quickly and we want to make sure we're leveraging that in the field, you can't really afford to relearn those lessons across multiple teams. It makes you really inefficient. And so building this data ecosystem was a really big part for us in creating an ecosystem of innovation. So there you kind of get your goal, your value alignment. We know what our goals are externally, what we value externally within IT and in operations. We know what our role is for enabling that. Now you can move on to aligning your people and process for breaking down these silos. And for us, it started with how we thought about governance and bringing together people. So we have an IT AI program that's focused on the internal adoption of AI. You've got to combine that with our AI task force, which is the group of people thinking about external investments for AI, and making sure that we're sharing lessons learned across these teams, making sure that where there are things that aren't working, that we know what those are, or that we're not duplicating investments in certain areas. And then we brought together a team called our AI Coordination and Advisory Panel, which is looking at process improvements that we need to do to better operate internally. This is things that are simple, like legal and InfoSec review. How many people have had an AI initiative get stuck because it's stuck in legal review for too long? And by the time you get a contract signed, Microsoft has come out and said they've actually put that in AI Foundry already. And so you have to start all over again. And so we really had to innovate on our internal processes and making sure that it's not just technology and business, it's our legal team, our contracts team, our InfoSec team, all coming together on this journey with us. So now you have governance in place and you're bringing people together to try to solve things together. And the next thing we thought about was building it into our operational processes. So we did have an AI program that was focusing on some of the cross-cutting fundamental things you need to invest in for AI, putting a strategic framework in place, making sure that we had a strategy and a roadmap for our data infrastructure, as I talked about earlier, elevating our knowledge management capabilities and the assets so that people knew what to do with their data to make it available to AI, policy, governance, those sorts of things. But we also had to think about the delivery side of things, and we deployed AI forward teams to think about things like an AI-enabled workforce. So the things you think about for deploying to a workforce is about democratizing AI to everyone in your organization. We deployed ChatGPT Enterprise. We deployed Copilot to all of our organization. We put training and literacy programs in place. We created a community of practice amongst our power users and early adopters. And you really govern that around the end user and democratization of AI. And that was about getting it in the hands of everyone, creating builders. You know what's best for making your workflow work better. But we also knew we had to focus on business operations. So an AI-enhanced operations team is really about focusing with our business partners on the things that they needed to solve to transform how we work within the foundation. So that we didn't think about an end-to-end process the same way as we had in the past, but we think about an AI-enabled business process. And so this really, we had to lean on business partnership. We had to lean on bringing together our data, as we talked about in the past already. And then the final thing that we think about at the Gates Foundation is really about the art of the possible. So we believe in innovation. We believe that AI is a key tool in that innovation. And so we want to make sure that we are applying the things that we're learning internally to our external environment. One of the things I always say is that AI is a contact sport. You got to get in and get your hands dirty to understand what is possible. And so what we tried to do with this is deploy an emerging technology team to go take a look at not just what is AI capable of now, but what is going to become capable in the next 3 months, in the next 6 months. So that when we think about the investments we're making in the world that have long-term payoffs, we're making the right investments with the right tools and technology. And so this looked like experimenting with MCP servers before they were even released to the public and they were in beta form. This looks like exploring new tools that might be able to solve problems in new ways. And a lot of times accepting throwaway work and just taking those learnings and applying that either to the investments we're making in the world to try to have the impact that we want to have, or maybe just in internal tools that we're adopting within the foundation. And all of that is backed by some core tenets that we put in place to make sure that we were able to kind of row the boat all in the same direction. We wanted to make sure that teams were making decisions based off the same types of principles, that they were prioritizing the work based off of these same core tenets. And so we wanted to promote responsible AI practices focused on user needs, really making sure it was centered on user needs and not just process for process sake. We wanted to take an experimental driven approach. We wanted to make sure that we moved from experimentation to things that were reusable, scalable, and supportable. So don't just experiment in everything, but the things where maybe you can take a pattern and reuse that elsewhere, things that we knew would be supportable and scalable. And then making sure that we're doing things that are really aligned with our foundation goals. And so an example of this is as we rolled out tools to the entire foundation and people were adopting custom GPTs and agents got released within Copilot, and so people were building their own agents, one of the key things people wanted to do was go build support tools. So a support workflow for our finance team or our IT team or a policy bot for our legal policies. But it became pretty confusing for users to know where to go. And we thought that we needed to think about some sort of orchestration layer for our agents. And so we actually weren't very happy with Copilot at the time. This was about a year ago. I don't know how many of you were really happy with Copilot a year ago. It was promising, but still had some issues. So we leaned into experimentation and started looking at a new tool as an orchestration layer and enterprise agent. It actually did a really good job with our knowledge worker type use cases. It did a good job with user onboarding, with policy, with support type questions. But when we looked at reusability and scalability, we thought, do we really want to put in another enterprise tool into this ecosystem? It's going to cost quite a bit. Is that really that supportable? Well, maybe if it's really aligned with our goals, we would do that. And when we compared it against other tools for doing things that we really thought were strategic, so it's great to do a better job internally with support, but the thing that really drives our mission forward is using AI to draw insights out of all of our disparate data, our strategy documents, our investment documents, all of our external data. And this tool actually didn't do a very good job with that. Not because the tool couldn't, but because we hadn't actually done the data engineering for that work yet. So we put that project on hold, kind of to this whole thing of an experimental driven approach. You might stop doing work because it's not proving value right then. And we started focusing on getting our data right. So we started focusing on our investment data, which sat in layers and layers of investment libraries sitting in within SharePoint, our structured data that sat within our transactional systems like Salesforce and Workday, and then a ton of unstructured data that came from our grantees that spoke to the efficacy of our work. The other thing that we had to do was really make sure that we were aligning with the business. So not just going in the back end and working on our data, but really thinking about what are the types of questions that people want to ask of this data? How do we surface the data in a way where we might be able to answer those questions in an efficient way? And so these core tenets, that's just an example of how that helped us make a quick decision on something and pivot from one area, which actually as a CIO would have been a nice win. We would have deployed this tool, probably would have gotten credit for putting AI in the system, but then we would have spent the next 6 months fine-tuning it, and we wouldn't have been able to take the time to spend on what we thought was really a value add long-term for the foundation. That kind of led us to about this past spring, summer time frame when we started to do a mid-year reflection on where we were headed with AI. We had done a good job on investing in these foundational investments. Our data platform was being built. We actually went live with this AI-ready data platform sitting in Azure this fall. That was leading to a lot of really good experimentation. We have over 1,000 different custom GPTs and agents in our ecosystem. We're measuring what's getting used most. Actually, a lot of them go unused because people experiment, it doesn't work, and then we've got to get to the lifecycle management piece of it. And I think I see a person on my team responsible for that over here. But experimentation, I think was working. I would call it a success, which was leading to a lot of productivity wins. In our employee survey, we added AI into our employee engagement survey, and we got really good results on individual and team level productivity wins. But we were struggling to get into this transformation layer, this layer of really transforming the way that the foundation worked in ways that would amplify the type of impact that we wanted to have outside our environment. And so we knew going forward we wanted to pivot a bit. We wanted to make sure that we were focusing more on intentional return on investment. And that in order to do that, we needed to really focus on end-to-end process redesign. We needed to make sure that we had AI-ready data to support that redesign. And we needed to have a deep partnership with the business to make sure that we were helping answer the right questions and get the right outcomes. And so that led to this sort of moment in time. I was spending time with our chief financial officer, our chief strategy officer. We were working on ways that we could leverage AI in our strategy review process. And the strategy review process at the Gates Foundation is our core business process. It's our ERP, it's the way that we do work. Once a year, teams come in front of Bill and our board. They present on their strategy and share metrics for how their work's been going over the past year and sort of evidence for how that work is going. And then they share their theory of change for how they want to move that work going forward. And all of this leads to Bill making decisions on the types of investments he's going to make over the course of the next 4 years in each of the strategies. So you think about 42 teams coming and the amount of data that's presented. Unless you're Bill and you're in all of these meetings, you don't really have the opportunity to connect the dots between all of this. And so you end up having to have an army of people go through all of this data and draw those connections. With AI, we actually thought that it could accelerate that, and the insights that we could get from that data could be really amplified. So we were working on a pilot to do that work. We had put a team together. We were embracing how fast we were going and the experimentation we were doing. And about a week later, Bill calls Ankur and says, "Hey, strategy review is coming up in about 8 weeks. I would really love it if I had an AI tool to be able to help me with this process." And so immediately, the call to action came, right? our timeline accelerated. We had to pull together teams from our data team, from our knowledge management team, from our AI engineering team, from our productivity team to try to figure this out. Can we get something in place for Bill to be able to help him with the strategy review process in about 6 weeks' time? So technology preparedness, the modernization of our environment, the investments we had been making for AI-ready data and understanding the capabilities of AI, at that moment in time, alignment with our foundation mission. It was a pretty powerful moment, and it's one example of many, but I think it's pretty compelling. So we got the team together. We did basically a 6-week sprint, and we thought about, all right, let's lean into those core tenets and principles that we want to go after. We started by saying, what are the most common pain points in our strategy review process? And we thought there was a couple. One is this idea of an ELT AI assistant that will help summarize across all of these documents for our ELT and for Bill, prepare them for the strategy review time. It takes hours and days and analysts to come and help answer questions. Well, rather than asking an analyst a question and having them go look through all the data and come back 2 days later with an answer, could you use an agent to do that? And the other was an AI assistant that would help you look at the assessment across multiple years. So if you think about what was presented in 2 years ago and last year, and is there a continuity with what's presented this year? So we looked at those couple of use cases, and then we thought, we'll start with experimentation. Rather than just build one tool, let's actually go try 2 different approaches to it and see what works and take the best of the 2 and put that in front of Bill. And fast forward, we actually ended up putting both in front of him because Bill's pretty interested in learning as well. And so tool A was built using GPT-5. It took an approach of looking across all of our data, so the amount of data that we collect for our investments, for our strategies, and went historically through the 20 years of our existence. So it was sort of a broad approach to data, using GPT-5 and deep research to try to make sense of that data. A lot of this data was actually ungoverned, unstructured data that had to try to make sense, and we weren't quite sure how it would do. So on the other side, our tool B, we chose Claude as the front end for this, and primarily because Claude had the more mature MCP connector at the time. It was pretty new when we started. The connectors that it had into the approach that we wanted to take was superior to others, so we chose Claude as a front end with a knowledge graph in the back end using Neo4j. And the knowledge graph then was taking more structured and curated data around our strategies. We only went back 3 years. We kept it limited to certain strategy teams to try to get more precise answers back, to see what the comparison of these 2 approaches would be. And so in that work, it took the information from SharePoint to run our strategy reviews and our learning sessions. It took some of our financial data actually out of our portfolio overview dashboard. And we actually got pretty different results from these 2 approaches. One approach did a really good job of drawing connections you might not have seen across all of our different program teams. And it was actually a really trusted approach. So more people ended up using this tool, and when we asked them why, it was because it would actually surface the source documents that it was using to make the decisions and give you the outcomes that you wanted. And so whether or not the answer was right wasn't as important as, can I actually go have transparency into how you got that answer and go inspect that. So the human in the middle part was really important with that. But it actually didn't do a really good job of surfacing the right data because it was such a wide array of data. The other thing that it didn't do well is it had to do all that processing real time, and so it would take a few minutes to get the answer back. And in the course of a strategy review, you want to get an answer really quickly because you kind of want to go back and forth with the data. And especially if you're in the middle of the room, waiting a few minutes doesn't work. So for some users, it didn't work that way. The other tool, actually, a lot of that processing, the contextualization of the data, the taxonomy of the data, that was all done pre-processing in the knowledge graph. So it gave you really quick answers, and so people liked using that in the flow of the process. But because the data came through a knowledge graph, it couldn't link you to the source documents, so people didn't trust it. And we actually had our strategy team go and manually check answers for things, and it was actually really accurate and did a really good job of precise answers that you would expect in the context of our organization, but people didn't trust it because they didn't have that access into the source documents. So it was really interesting learning. What we're doing now is we're taking the learnings from two and we're actually trying to converge into a common tool that takes the best from both worlds. We're doing a review with the ELT, our executive leadership team, on Thursday, and with Bill on December 1st. And we're not done yet, so we're figuring this out. One of the things that we thought about as we were building these tools, just to say it, actually, we just got through strategy review. People use these tools. I would say it was wildly successful. People had a lot of really good feedback on the insights they were able to get on how this accelerated their preparation for strategy reviews. And so we're going to keep building on this. What we thought about as we built it was building it with these layers in mind so that you could swap out layers as needed. Just this morning, Microsoft announced that Claude is a part of AI Foundry. Well, we were struggling with Tool B because it's Claude front end. We would have to pay for licenses for all of our users. Do we really want to make that investment? We're working with Microsoft right now on introducing Copilot as a part of this. Copilot's actually come along quite a bit since we introduced this tool. Copilot, what's it called? Copilot Researcher? Functionality wasn't there when we started this work. And so this ability to swap out these layers as we go is a key component of what we're doing. I think the other thing that I think about in our ability to bring this together was all of the work that came up front. And that we're running out of time, so I'm not going to go through all of the technical details of the work. But I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts. One is we put a lot of investment in this. You might wonder, you have the luxury to be able to go build two different tools and compare those. Why don't you just wait for the functionality to get better? And we do think that's what's coming over time. In the areas that are key and strategic to your business, though, we think it's worth the effort to get your hands dirty and do the investigation, go do customized builds so that you can start to make your data ready for the work, so that you can understand what processes need to change, so that you can build that partnership with your business. And that customized build might be the only way to do it at the time. But over time, if you build this in a way where things, with your architecture is nimble, you merge with out-of-the-box technology that's coming. So that's been our approach. We wanted to make sure that we're optimizing for value as a part of this, that we're developing this roadmap where we're just a living beta and we're able to swap out things interchangeably, staying nimble, and designing for multiple use types over time. And so, when I think about that overwhelming feeling I had at Ignite this morning, with AI being embedded in everything from cybersecurity to how you think about data in what did you call it? The Graph IQ is the new data environment within Microsoft. I could get paralyzed, right? Where do I start? Do I need to replace everything that I'm doing? I think the first step for us was create manageable spheres of work. Break it down into what are the things you can control, put it in think about those spheres in work that is one like another. And then this is a contact sport. You got to get in there. You got to roll up your sleeves. You got to figure it out. And then when that moment comes, when your why comes, when the reason that you're here comes together, it will pull your teams together. It will break down those silos, and you move forward.
I think we're back at the beginning.
Yeah.
And as we close out, just a couple of observations. So one is, I work in an ecosystem of about 400,000 nonprofits that Microsoft services. And there's a very small subset of those that I think are doing AI well, if I can just put it that way. And kind of a couple of common threads amongst them are, one, this embracing of experimentation. And that's not always just with the Microsoft stack. I mean, it's embracing it's experimenting with our products as well as our competitors' products. So there's that piece of it, and really having the organizational buy-in to do that, learning what you can learn. And then the second is when the AI wave really started, we saw customers really take on kind of low risk, low impact kinds of things. Let's build a chatbot for support. Sure, it's great at operational efficiency and productivity, but it doesn't really get to the why of the organization. The organizations that really do AI well, they take it from the top down, and they really take on those more foundational, no pun intended, aspects of their business. So just two observations there. A question though, you've hit on a couple of things. One is the pace of change. You mentioned that we just announced the Claude models becoming available in Foundry. Now you've got to swap out a pancake in your pancake stack there. So good that you guys can do that, and you've got a process and a framework around doing that. But we're also seeing a lot of AI starting to get injected into just about every product that you buy.
Yeah.
In fact, I was mind-boggled by some of the billboards I saw between the airport and here. I'm like, I've never heard of any of these companies. Like, where are these things? So I'm just wondering how you draw the line there, or have you had a chance to figure that out? Where does the experimentation in saying we're going to embrace all products and all AI being brought into products?
Yeah.
Have you had a chance to address that yet?
Well, I think in the keynote they actually said that one of the reasons for so much failure is overemphasizing experimentation. So experimentation just for experimentation's sake, probably not the way to go, although in some cases we're doing that because we want to learn what's possible for the outside world. I really think it's experimentation within the context of the business problem you're trying to solve. And so if you think about a hire to fire process, do you really want to go build a tool outside of your Workday business process and tool that supports that, or do you want something that's embedded? For us, we use Workday, embedded in Workday. So we think about in the flow of your work. I think they said that actually in the keynote today. Like, think about that AI innovation or that process innovation in the flow of how people already work. Don't create some sort of side thing. So I think that's one component of how we do it. Most of our business processes we're thinking about either this needs to be integrated in or within our transactional systems. The advantage for strategy review for us is it's a sort of an undigitized process for this. It's a very manual process consisting of Excel sheets, PowerPoints, PDFs, and so it was sort of ripe for starting over and thinking fresh.
Great, thank you. And I think, let me just look at the time here. We've got a couple minutes left. We really are at the end of the presentation, or back at the beginning. If you'd like to learn more about any of this, either the experience at the Gates Foundation, or if you'd like to talk to anybody from the Elevate team, come by the education booth down in the industry hub. We'd be happy to talk with you about your specific scenarios and kind of where you're at in the AI journey. 2 minutes left. Any questions? Anything anybody wants to know?
I was curious about the amount of time that this effort spanned. Like, was this like a 1 year, 2 year commitment?
The actual strategy review tool we built was 6 weeks. But really, that was because of investments we had made along the way. So this data platform that we had built that was bringing together the capability of bringing together all the structured and unstructured data was a 1 year program. It went live in the fall, but think about that as something that will unlock several use cases. The knowledge graph that we were using in this was a tool that we were exploring for our knowledge management solution. We were looking at the ability for how to use GPT-5 as a part of our productivity and collaboration team. So there were different components that were being invested in that once this use case came, it pulled all those things together, and we did that in 6 weeks.
All right. Anything else?
Cool. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, everybody.